Toot Norberling would like to welcome everyone to Taking the Essence. The mind is the creator of our experiences with Eddie Peet. Eddie's been teaching at Langray Tanka Center since 1997. He first met the Dharma back when he attended meditation classes with Venerable Pende Hatter, the founder of Karuna Hospice Service. Wow, that's got to be pretty deep. Thank you for being here and welcome everyone.
Okay. Hi, Charlotte. Welcome everybody who's come along to the course today. We'll just begin as we normally do by doing a short breathing meditation. And then I'll put up a couple of slides so we can take refuge together and generate a mind of enlightenment. So just get comfortable in your seat. And this basically means make sure that your back is straight and your shoulders are relaxed. And while you continue to breathe normally and naturally, become aware of the movements that take place anywhere within your body. And with your awareness lightly placed upon those movements and the feelings associated with them, allow them to take place. And at the same time, allow the body and mind to relax. So you have a relaxed presence, focused upon the movements and feelings associated with the body, while you breathe normally and naturally. Now, if you find yourself thinking about anything at all, relax a little more, drop the thought and come back to the body. And acknowledge the movements and feelings that are taking place as you breathe normally and naturally. Now take a few moments to recollect your purpose for attending this class. And then having refreshed your idea for being here, think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. And that in the space above you appear all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. There are other meditational deities, there are the arahats and the protectors. So these are the field for taking refuge, and they are in the space above you. Recollect that everyone has a wish to avoid suffering, and that everyone equally wishes to be happy. Yet everyone equally lacks genuine happiness. Better recollect that the causes of suffering can be eliminated, and the potential for genuine happiness abides equally within us all. And to dispel the causes of suffering and to actualize genuine happiness, we have to abandon different forms of attachment we have to the fantasies of just this life, to the pleasures of cyclic existence, to our own singular welfare, and to grasping at an independent and objective reality. So the possibilities of abandonment do exist. And we need to decide for ourselves to bring about those forms of abandonment, to benefit ourselves and to benefit everyone else. And we can do this if we rely upon others who have actually done that, the methods they used to bring about these abandonments, and a community that's interested in doing the same things. I think that's what you'd like to do. And then breathing in deeply through your nostrils. Exhale. And allow your eyes to flutter open if they're closed. And then I'll sort of open up the class now and sort of briefly introduce the topic, and then we'll take refuge together and generate the mind of enlightenment together. I'll just do the share screen now. So as you can see, our course topic is mind being the creator of experience, and this is the third class we're doing in the series. And to bring about the very best forms of experience, now to create the very best forms of experience, we need to rely upon others who have done that. So we're going to take refuge in those beings, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and so forth, and their teachings. So the next slide will have the prayers for doing that. So again, thinking that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are present in the space in front of us and above us, and that we're surrounded by all living beings, we can recite this together, and we'll do it 3 times in English. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So in response to this wish, I think that lights and nectars move out from the heart of the Buddha and all the enlightened beings surrounding him, and they wash over you. And they remove any obstacle that hinders the enlightenment that you're seeking. And with the removal of these obstacles, recollect the 4 immeasurable thoughts of love and compassion, joy and equanimity. And thinking that this is what you yourself will develop. You'll develop these 4 immeasurable thoughts and help others develop them too. And recollect that to do that, we actually need to accumulate a great deal of merit and to purify the mind. And we need to let go of any form of clinging that we have to the body itself, our sense of self, our ideas, and our merit. So as an auspicious means to recognize that understanding, we can recite the mandala offering. So that's the next slide. I think that this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Naryatayami. So we release the offering. It's accepted by the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and they smile at us with delight. And we look up into the eyes of the Buddha. And we feel accepted and at ease. And then an emanation of the Buddha himself leaves his own heart, moves through space and comes to abide above the crown of your head, facing in the same direction you are. This emanation descends, entering the crown of your head and coming down to rest at the level of your heart. And the light expands, filling your body and mind, going out through the pores of your skin and filling all of space. And wherever there are beings within space, think that they're touched by this light and awoken fully into the enlightened state. And acknowledge that there's no difference between yourself and any other enlightened being. The deepest nature of your mind is exactly the same. And so while you're breathing in this peaceful and easeful state, the thought arises, this is wonderful. However, we've made this promise to help others. And so with this recollection, the light begins to withdraw from the 10 directions of space and re-enter your heart. You feel yourself embodied, breathing normally and naturally, sitting in your seat. And you remind yourself once again, I wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of others. I'm attending this teaching as a means to do that. And then breathing in deeply through your nostrils. Exhale through your mouth. And allow your eyes to flutter open and to be present in your seat. So welcome back, everyone. So let's have a look at what we're going to do today. So in the previous 2 weeks, we looked at perception and how it can be dependent upon the physical senses like the eyes, the ears, the nose, and so forth. But it can also arise in dependence upon the mind itself. Today, we're going to have a look at conception, sort of the mind itself that's primarily engaged with the process of thinking, and how it is the creator of an indirect experience. We're also going to look at what the function of conceptuality is. What's the function of thinking, in other words? Now, there are some people, especially in the past, but even today, who believe that all conceptual thoughts are bad and, in fact, should be abandoned. Now, this was an idea quite prevalent in the 8th century in Tibet. And it came about through a Chinese monk called Hashang, who sort of misunderstood what the Buddha taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So he thought that the way to meditate on emptiness, for example, was simply to empty the mind of all conceptual thought. And this view still has many adherents today. But if we hold this view ourselves, what would happen is that you wouldn't be able to make any progress whatsoever on the spiritual path. One thing for sure is you wouldn't be able to remember anything, because memory is conceptual. So if we took that point of view, basically spiritual development would cease. Now, there is a part in the spiritual path where we do actually want to achieve a sort of a non-conceptual state. But before that, most of the path is conceptual. And there are different types of thoughts we could have that would be very useful to our development of the path. And there are other types of thoughts which sort of are obstacles to our progress. So the idea is to sort of work out which ones are obstacles and to put those aside, to abandon them over time, and to find out which ones are the skillful and useful thoughts and develop them over time. It's in many ways the function of conceptuality is to bring us closer to the natural wish that we have to be happy. But we find in our own experience, of course, that we have lots of thoughts that sort of obstruct the happiness that we're seeking. So you sort of have to identify what those are over time and then to abandon them. Now, our class today is really just on sort of what conceptuality is and its function. Next week, we're going to be looking at the different types of concepts we need to abandon and the other ones we need to adopt. And probably today, you're going to be introduced to a lot of new concepts, new ideas, and it may be a little difficult. I just want to put that out there right up front so that if it starts getting in your head, so it goes, oh my God, what's he talking about? Go, that's completely normal. I've been going through the same process, getting this class ready. So it's just the way it is. And you might as well have it happen with me and then go, okay, so now, get ready for the real authentic teachers and go, at least I've got a little bit there and I don't need to drive myself crazy with my own thinking. I know it's not an easy topic, but I'm willing to give it a go. So the way I'll present this sort of class is like we've done before, which is just to sort of introduce you first to the different texts I've relied upon, then we'll define what conception is, how it functions and so forth. And at the end, what we should try and take away from the class. So here are the books I've used before. So you can see here, there's no difference whatsoever in terms of the books I used presenting perception. Now, for those of you who really want to sort of get into this, probably the best book to start with is the one in the middle there called Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Sering. And so Geshe Sering used to teach in London while he was there. He produced, I think it was 5 books in the series, The Foundation of Buddhist Thought. And I've used a lot of the material from that book in this class. The other material is all very good, but it's quite sort of deep, precise, compact, and it's slow going. So I says, if you were to begin, I would suggest the one in the middle. The Foundation of Buddhist Practice, of course, at the end here, that's the other one I'd use to support it, because again, the writing is very straightforward. The concepts are put forward in a simple way so you get your head around. So the big time takeaway from the course, of course, is to accept that the mind is the creator of all experience and that conceptual thoughts can create happiness, but they can also create discontent. So let's sort of now start into the course itself. And how I'm going to begin is we need to talk about sort of like everything that exists, because whatever does exist does so dependent upon the mind. It can only be acknowledged to exist because you have a mind that's getting at it. If there were no mind, you couldn't tell whether it existed or not. So let's have a look at the first one. So dharmas, there's different meanings to the word dharma. One of them is an existent thing or a phenomena. And that's how we're going to talk about it just in this slide. And when we talk about them, we can talk about them from 2 perspectives. One from what they call the objective side and one from the subjective side. Now the objects, I've got a picture of a chair here, because we'll be talking about chairs quite a lot in this class today. And these objects that exist only exist in only one of 2 ways. They are either impermanent phenomena or they are permanent phenomena. And the impermanent phenomena are the ones that we are most familiar with. So we have chairs, people, books, anything that your eye can see, anything that you can taste, touch, all those phenomena are impermanent. They arise, depend upon causes and conditions, and they function. Now, these impermanent phenomena, the only way you can know them, or not the only way, but the primary way you can know them is through your senses. So your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, the body, the mind itself can access these impermanent phenomena like chairs and people and so forth. But what they can't get at is the permanent phenomena. So your normal senses cannot get at the permanent, they can only get at the impermanent. Now, when we come to the permanent phenomena, there aren't all that many of them. And so I'll just mention a couple without going into any great detail about them. So one of them is, of course, emptiness, which is the ultimate nature of any type of phenomena. So emptinesses are permanent phenomena. They exist without depending upon causes and conditions. So emptinesses are permanent phenomena. What they call true cessations are also permanent phenomena. And another phenomena called unproduced space. Now, these permanent phenomena, as I said before, you can't get at them with your senses. You can't get at them directly. So, in other words, you cannot see with your eyes a true cessation. You can't hear a true cessation. Those can only come from the special type of mind, the mind itself, mental awareness, in other words. So the mental awareness can get at the permanent phenomena. So like I said, so one of the permanent phenomena is the emptiness of inherent existence of any type of phenomena. But like I said, you can't get it with your eyes, your ears, your nose, whatever. It needs to be got at through mental consciousness. And that mental consciousness is what they call a yogic direct perceiver, which we talked about previously. Now, in the Buddhist texts, and oftentimes when you take teachings, it's the objects that are talked about most often, the things that actually exist. But in many ways, it's the subjects that are the more important. Now, if you look at on the subjective side, we've got the two different types of consciousnesses, the perceivers and the conceivers. The perceivers, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and so forth, are up the top. They affirm the objects. They sort of get at them directly. But just like you're looking at me, you're looking at the screen, your eye senses affirm that I'm appearing on the screen talking to you. Your ear sense affirms that you can actually hear the sounds. Now, the conceptual mind does not do that. It does not apprehend or engage the objects through a positive recognition. Instead, how it does it, it eliminates all other objects that are not the object you're interested in. So it's through what they call elimination. So therefore, in Buddhist epistemology, a conceptual consciousness is construed as negative in nature, as it arises from a process of elimination. So here, it's important to think, so when we say negative in nature, we don't mean it's bad, we have a negative feeling about it or anything like that. It just means there's a whole lot of stuff that are not there, absences, eliminated. So Miffy, you had your hand raised?
I'm just wondering, is that similar to, there's the Western point of view of when we recognize things, what we go through in our mind is, say I'm looking at you, I'm going, not this person, not this person, not this person until I get to you, but it's a process of elimination. And same thing of when you're looking at even at a chair, for instance, it's like not that type of chair, not that, not this, not that, it's that one. So you go through the knots first.
Yep, sure. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So in terms of conceptuality, that's sort of what it does. It eliminates a whole lot of everything that is not the phenomenon that you're interested in, and just deals with just that phenomenon. So that's just the start. I hope that's not too, does your head in too much. I found it's quite difficult to get my head around, especially when you start reading the material. Because when they talk about concepts, they talk about the not thing.
It sounds a little bit like
nots.
it's like Rumsfeld, the known knowns, the unknown unknowns,
yeah,
the known
that's
unknowns.
Right. Just like that. That's a good example. Once again, it's just like that. Yeah. So now let's have a look at how conceptions are defined through the Buddhist lens. So I've got two definitions up here, because I think we have to. We can probably work it out a little bit better. So the first one is put up by Dharmakirti. So he says, a conception is that consciousness that apprehends the object indicated by words in relation to the actual thing. So here we can see a really close connection between thought on one hand and language and concepts on the other. So Layla, are you raising your hand to ask something? No? Okay. So in the definition here, the term words refers to both language and concept. So the consciousness apprehends the object indicated by words in relation to the actual thing. So has anybody found this? So what's happening to people's minds when they hear this?
It's a very wordy definition about words.
Okay, so I'll give you an example, right? A simple one. You just lift up your hand and look at your hand. So there's your hand, isn't it? That's called your hand. Now just put it down and just say the word hand.
Hand.
Right? Now you know what you're talking about, don't you? That word is related to this object here. But the word itself is not this object here, is it? The word indicates the object called hand. Just put it down and go, yeah, I've got a hand. The actual thing is the hand. We use a word to describe, to name it, but to our mind arises an image of a hand or a concept. I mean, we'll go, yeah, I know what we're talking about. We're talking about hands. That's all it's sort of meaning. So like if you have a friend that's not here with you at the moment, so you know that your friend exists, and you just say her name or his name. Yeah? So that name is related to the actual person. And the name and the meaning appears to your mind. So you know, I'm talking about Miffy. I'm talking about Jack or John, someone. So the consciousness, so even though the person's not there, your consciousness is apprehending that object, John, Miffy, Shayla, Eddie, in relation to the actual thing.
So that seems to be the crucial thing, that we can apprehend the object in our consciousness, even if they're not there in front of us.
That's right. They don't need to be there in front of us. They can be, and then we could get at them with our perception. But when we talked about them to them, it would be their mental image that's arising. And we're talking using that. as our referent. So that's a concept, right? Conceptual consciousness.
Anne says, is it similar to when we name the thing in another language, when we don't know that other language?
Right? Other language. Yeah, you'd be right, Anne. That's right. So we're introduced to the other thing using this new language. So, like for me, for instance, I was growing up. You come across objects that you don't know what they are. So you might say, like, what is that? And then somebody will say, well, that is called an apple or a pen. And now, as soon as I say it, the mental image arises of the pen. So later on, when the pen is not there, they can be said, oh, could you pass me a pen? Immediately, the idea of a pen arises related to the actual previous pen. And oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Here's a pen. And you pick one up.
Or Eddie, it's like if you like learning French and you point to your head and you go, when you're learning, they don't say, oh, your head is la tête. No. They just point to the head and they go, la tête.
That's right.
And then, I suppose then you can ask people, so what language do you dream in? You might be fluent in English, but you dream in French, whatever's the more familiar. But you learn by pointing to the object, isn't it?
Yeah, and the point to your object, like for me, like I'm looking here and I go like this, and I can't see my head, and you probably can't see your own if you went like that, right? But an image would appear to your mind. Yeah. That image associated with the name is the concept.
Mm-hmm. And says, yes, Miffy, that's what I was thinking too. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Miffy. So here, as they say, an intermediary mind helps the mind as a whole access its object. And that can take the form of an image or an idea, as well as an actual word or a label. Now, the conceptual mind, unlike perception, always operates through this intermediary and therefore engages actively with its object. This is quite different with perception. Like if I just raise your hand up, like it's just there, right? The eyes just get it, it just appears and you got it. But with concepts, you've sort of got to engage in them in a more sort of forceful way. You've got to sort of construct them. And here is another nice definition, which is quite simple in a way if you knew what a generic image is, which we're going to talk about today. Right? So a thought that apprehends its object through a generic image. So I think in many ways this is a sort of a simpler way of saying it. So this generic image is the thing that comes between the actual object and the mind. So, so the mind is dealing with these images, usually made up through names often. And so we say the name, and the mind gets at the name and its image.
So, Eddie, this one reminds me of something from Oliver Sacks, where there was a neurological disruption with someone that he didn't have a generic image of a face. So he could see someone's face and he'd just see disjointed, eyes and nose and ears, but none of it came together as a face. So he had the perception with his eyes, but no conception. He couldn't get at it for whatever brain injury that he had.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So the generic image of face was not the one that he perceived with his eyes. And this is a great example because that's how it works, right? You never actually get at what they call the real face. You construct the face through language and ideas. And as Miffy's pointed out in her example was, this person could see the actual face, that would appear to their perception, but when they have a thought of the face, that's not what arose. And you find this with blind people who recover their sight. Like while they're blind, they have a perfect idea of what colors are and so forth and see them and can deal with them. Yet when they come to actually see them, when they recover their sight, they see something that's completely different and they can't associate the two anymore. Okay, so we're going to spend, so let's go to, we're going to have a look now at this term called generic image. So we're going to define it first of all. And what it is really nice and simple to remember and easy. It's just the appearing image of a conceptual mind. And we'll see how these images can arise. The most simple way they arise is through language. Like you say something and then it just, conceptually, you grab it. And that's what the generic image is.
So do you mean like if you say the word head,
Yep.
Someone's head, we all have a generic image of a
Image
head.
of a head. That's right. And our mind like holds that image and goes, yeah, head. Okay. So when we think of or remember an object, there always appears to our conceptual mind an object that is the opposite of that. This is what they call these terms, the non-thing. It's not the actual chair. That's what I'm being so. So if you think, okay, so you're all sitting on a chair, but that chair that you're actually sitting on doesn't appear to your minds, does it? If it did, it would have to like it's a physical thing. It'd have to be sort of jammed in your head somewhere and go, oh, yeah, there's the chair I'm talking about. All that happens is the idea of the chair that you're sitting on pops up in your mind. Right? And that's what you access. And when that object appears, like it's the only thing, it eliminates every other concept, every other thought you could have, and only chair arises. And this is the generic image of the chair. So even though there's no actual chair right in front of you, nevertheless, there's a generic image of a chair. So the conceptual mind apprehends the chair and every other type of phenomena through generic images. So for instance...
Excuse me, please, Eddie.
Yep. Who's speaking now?
Sue.
Sue, okay, Sue, where you go?
With the chair, even though we're sitting on it, it's like the other sense consciousnesses are picking up on the feeling,
sure,
the color and the sound, and then is it the conceptual mind has got the idea chair?
Yes, it's in this case, so we have a chair that's present, you can feel it underneath you and so forth. And when you use the word chair, or even if you don't, and you just thought of the chair, you would have the image of a chair appearing, or, you'd have, the mind could engage with that idea of the chair that you're on.
Okay, but we need the sense objects. It's got to come in through the other senses first.
Well, no, not necessarily, which I was just going to say.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So for instance, there is somebody that you really liked, had a great relationship with, and they've died. So there's no way our physical senses can apprehend them. In fact, they don't exist in this world anymore. Yet they can exist to our conceptual consciousness, can't they? We just have to think of them. And the generic image of that person and all of our feelings associated with them immediately appear to us.
Thanks.
So that gives you an example where the actual objects aren't necessary. You don't need to have them there. So this definition here was given by Kyabje, who was one of Lama Tsongkhapa's heart sons. So I like this one because it's so simple. And it basically comes at the intention of all the other definitions you can come across. Because sometimes these definitions are very long, and for me at least, they really do your head in, even though they're becoming very specific about what they're getting at. So this is a sort of a general definition, but it's the intention of all the others. An appearing image to the conceptual mind. Now, the other senses, like your eyes, your ears, and nose, and so forth, they can't generate conceptual images. And they don't. Right? They just get at the raw data. Conceptual images, like I said, require that most of them thought, a conceptual mind, which is different than the perceptual mind. Generic images, in many ways, if we use another analogy, are like reflections of the object. So if you look in the mirror, for instance, our face is reflected in the mirror, isn't it? But it's not our actual face. Our actual face is on the other side of the mirror. But we can know what our face looks like by just looking in the mirror. But so even though we're sitting on the chairs, we're not looking at them, we can feel them and we know what chairs are through these generic images.
Edie, sometimes if you've been in a teaching for a very, very long time, your chair may start taking on the generic image of a rock.
It does. That's very true. There are other different terms that they use for generic image. So I'll just mention a couple of them, and you'll see in a couple of next slides how these terms are associated with that. So one is called a meaning generality. The other is called a sound generality. So it depends upon what we think, the meaning of things, we get the generic image. That's like an image. When we hear sounds, we use language, they also construct images, conceptual images. And the term generality is really interesting because it means in general, not specifically the chair you're sitting on. So there's a bit of difference there. Basically, we've got these mental images that are arising, that can arise independent of a perception. Like if your children are not here now and I ask you to say, well, think of your children, immediately the image of your children would appear to you. And these images are called generic image, or the image that has arisen independence upon hearing, I mean a sound generality. And of course, we think of like, if I said to you, think of your children, what the conceptual mind does, it eliminates every other type of child there is and just has your child. So this is what's sort of like an elimination process. So now I'm going to give you a little a little exercise. So I want you to think about So I don't want you to look at this chair. I want you to just think about it. So you're all sitting on a chair. I hope, I imagine you're all sitting on chairs. I don't want you to look at that chair. I just want you to think about the chair that you're sitting on and see what appears to your mind. What's the image of the chair that you are sitting on appearing to your mind? Okay, now that image can never be any more than a representation of the chair you're actually sitting on. The thought about your chair is not the actual chair, is it? Now, because you're visual conscious in the actual chair, you are thinking about it, that you're thinking about, sorry, between your visual consciousness, between your, what do you call the, your body consciousness and the actual chair, there appears the image of the chair. Now, if you'd all like to just sit up, stand up and have a look at your chair. Now, is there a difference between that chair that you're actually sitting on and the chair that you thought about that appeared to your mind? There probably will be. And
my chair's got these, Eddie, my chair's got these feet on it that I never even noticed were there.
That's right. So there's a massive difference in the richness that appears to your perception, to your eye senses of your chair and the one you thought about. Right? The one you thought about has left out a heap of detail, hasn't it? Right? And the detail is very obvious to your eyes. It's very obvious to your bottom as you're sitting on it. Right? So here again, we have this major difference between what you think is a chair and what is actually a chair. And that's why I put this up as like, these conceptions are fictions. You've made them up, which you have. Yeah? So just as the chair that's beneath you has also been made up, it has its parts and so forth, performing the function. It's very different than the one you made up.
So, Eddie, there's another example that comes to mind here. I've read like in popular magazines and things that when guys think of themselves, they often think of themselves as looking much younger. And when women think of themselves, they often think of themselves as looking much older.
Okay. Yeah, so here we have that's right. So we've, a conceptual construct. Right? We've made it up. And that person in this example, the one that the men think that they are younger, that's the one they actually think is true. And so when you think about these chairs, you think about yourself, it always appears true to you and you believe it.
It's so much so that we don't even question it. We just think, oh, that's me, that's how I am, until reality rudely reminds us, we're up a ladder and we're doing things a young person would, and we suddenly get reminded that we're not actually young.
Yeah, that's right. So you'll see later on why they describe conceptions as always mistaken. But they are always, and there's no difference, they are always mistaken. They're not always wrong, but they are always mistaken. So we're going to go on a little bit more and have a look at, break this idea down a bit more. It says, before I do that, though, but basically the concept is a subjective representation of an object that relates the object to other objects in the same class. So we said before about the chair, right? So you just thought of a chair, and it's like all sorts of chairs just form an image of one chair. Every experience you've had of any type of chair, that's the concept of the chair. But then when you get up to look at your actual chair, it's a very different chair. Even though I thought, just think of the chair you're sitting on, like it becomes all chairs, it becomes one chair. That's the one. You look down at what's actually there, it's a very different chair. And so just as if we were saying before, how men can think that they're much younger than they actually are. And that's the concept that they think is real, and they behave as if it's real, when in fact they might be a lot older than what they actually are. So there's a sort of a disconnect there, isn't there? That's why I say these conceptions, the ideas are always mistaken, and they're mistaken because we think they're true. We're behaving towards them as if what we think of is the actual thing, is true. So here we've got a whole lot of different chairs. So I wanted to put these up there, all different colors, all sorts of chairs, right? Yeah, like I said, there's all these chairs. If you just turn away from the screen and think of a chair, you're only going to get one chair that pops up. And it's like that one chair represents every chair.
Eddie,
Yes?
Nicola says or asks, so if our perceptions can't be trusted and our conceptions can't be trusted, what's left to trust?
Yeah,
Really
excellent.
exemplifies the meaning of the delusions that seem to run our lives.
Yeah.
And
So this
believe
is what I was
that
hoping to
heart.
leave to the last class, but you've already got it. That's what I want you to hold in mind and think about. That's right. So that's great. Whoever put this up, but that's what I was really trying to integrate. Like, last couple of weeks ago, holy heck, this thing of perception. I'm actually creating everything through my perception. The objects aren't actually there. Now we're doing the same with conception. Quite right.
That was Nicola.
Yeah, Nicola, this is very good, Nicola. That's right. So I'm not going to answer that. So how'd the rest of that go, Shana? So instead of both are sort of deceptive.
What's left to trust? It really exemplifies the meaning of the delusions that seem to run our lives.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, so the major delusion here, of course, is it's not such that the objects are appearing this way or that we're actually creating them. That's really not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the belief that this isn't the case. Our clinging to the objects that appear to us either through our sense, through our eyes, ears, nose, and so forth, all the ones that we think about are real and true.
So Eddie, that's really like when we start thinking about ourselves and say if we've got pretty low self-esteem or something, doesn't matter what people say to us, we believe that
Conception.
really deeply held conception.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so you can sort of see, can't you, like in an indirect way, how we can actually create a great deal of suffering for ourselves through these not only wrong conceptions, but having conceptions that we forget are actually, they're all mistaken, but yet we think they're true.
That seems to be the crux of it, because people can tell you, you're fine, and you just don't believe them. There's just a part of you that just goes, no, they're wrong.
Yeah.
Without having that ability to reflect and go, why am I, like, even noticing that what we're feeling is a belief. It's not true.
Yeah. Now, as you know, so when we have the concept of the chair, there's no actual chair that shares all the properties of every other chair. But we assume that there's a common chairness about chairs. And that's the fiction. And I think this is why we often find ourselves arguing with one another. We've made these assumptions about the things that we're talking about that are the same thing. When in fact, wide diversity about these things. So the representation of the chair in the conceptual mind is separate from the real chair. And this fictional entity that we hold on to is superimposed over every other chair. Of course, if we're sitting there and we see all these chairs, then it's not. We still have the idea of a chairness. We go, yeah, they're all chairs. But you can't say that, you know, one of these chairs with 3 legs is one with 4 legs. You know, we can actually see, we know, oh yeah, all these chairs are different. But like I say, move your eyes away from them, use the word chair, suddenly all of them come together and it's like one chair. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Now this, of course, this process doesn't mean that chairs don't exist. It just means that they don't exist in the way like we think they do.
So Eddie, is this like in our mind shorthand for our mind, so that when we say chair, we're not overwhelmed by every single chair that we've ever seen?
Right. Yeah, that's right. That is shorthand. The brain does it shorthand. It just goes like, chair, yeah, I know what you mean. So it's like every chair, just one chair, easy for you to deal with. Because if you had to recollect every type of chair that you've ever come across in your life, it might be a little difficult for us to get around. So the chairs that we're actually sitting on, well, yeah, they do exist. Well, but the chair that of our conceptual mind only exists as a generality. Right? The one we're sitting on is a specific chair. But the chair that arises, like I said, to the mind, to conception, is a general chair. It only exists as a generality because it's a conceptual construct. Now, the conceptual mind can be divided up in a number of different ways. So let's have a look at one of the divisions. Then we'll have a look at some of the relationships between perception and conception, and then we'll go back to the divisions again. So in terms of divisions, there are 3 types of conceptual mind. One of them arises through the force of listening or reading. Like, you know, so we find that when we find ourselves reading a book, you know, science fiction books, fantasy books, you know, the mind constructs all the images, doesn't it? Right? So the conceptions there are arising in dependence upon the force of like reading. But so if somebody was to, like, for instance, tell you about, like for me, for instance, I've never been to Tibet. But suppose one of the students comes to the center and says, Eddie, I've just come back from Tibet. I'd say, wow, what was it like? And they would start talking to me. And in dependence upon that, all these ideas would arise, right? So Tibet is not obvious to my vision. I'm not touching it. I'm not hearing any sounds from it. Yet I'm creating a mental construct of what I think Tibet is like. And I think what I'm thinking is true.
So this is why it's so impossible to make a movie of a book, because everybody's generic image of that fantasy book that you've been thinking about that's so vivid is completely different.
Yeah, it's personal, isn't it? It's specific to the person. So this is how sometimes they arise, you know, through listening. So, for instance, if you went to another country where people didn't use chairs, maybe they squatted, you know, like people often do in the East, they squat. And you started talking to them about chairs. Perhaps you'd met these people in the countryside. They didn't have any chairs in their house. You spoke to them about chairs. It's like, well, they've heard it. And they go, what are you talking about? And then you start describing to them a chair. Okay? The concept of a chair will arise. So the concept has arisen through listening. Another way they arise is through the force of contemplation. So, for instance, you read something or you heard something. then you start thinking about it more deeply. You think about it over and over. And what will happen is more ideas will come up, or the idea has more depth or more breadth. Right? So your idea either sort of expands of what you originally started with. So this way, once again, your concept can arise through contemplating an original idea, the first idea. Gets bigger, larger, more real. You know, for instance, another example, I'll use an example for, so we can use a chair, but we can also use a person. Right? So suppose the person that we found out in the country in Southeast Asia who didn't have any chairs in their house, the way they sat was squatting. You've told them about the chair. Now you've left their house and they start thinking about this concept of the chair. And so they start wondering, what might that feel like? What would you look like? Perhaps they go outside and get some sticks together and make some sort of object that they could actually sit on. So all these ideas are arising through what we call contemplation. Now, in the Dharma, of course, the conceptual mind, like I said, we first beginning by hearing about the Dharma and listening to it. As we know, that's just the beginning. We have to actually think about it. So this is the process of contemplation.
So does that mean then you might be thinking about the chair and then you could think, oh, it would be good to put some wheels on it?
Yep, that's right. But in terms of the Dharma, so we say in terms of, like, for instance, if we're contemplating on death and impermanence, we come upon the first topic, death is certain. And the person said, death is certain. We go, okay, I've heard death is certain. What does that mean? So you contemplate these few words, death is certain. So out of that, you might think, oh, I'm going to die. And that's right. Then you might think, shit, everybody's going to die. And you go, yes, that's right. And this is just through contemplating the idea that death is certain. And then you might think, what am I going to do? Another thought. So this is just examples of the contemplatory process that's arising in dependence upon this concept, death is certain. The last one is what they call natural concepts. Now, some of the natural concepts we have is a sense of self, a very strong sense of, like, I. We come into every type of life, it's there. Other natural conceptual thoughts are the ones of kindness. Right? We are always concerned with our own happiness. And so these are natural conceptual states. None of us like to be hurt, so we have an aversion towards being harmed. That's natural. So that should be enough on this one, right? Just for these divisions. Then I'm going to have a look now at perception and conception and just show you some ways that they're quite different. But I think already you should have some ideas of how they're very different. So perception and conceptions, right? So first, in terms of perception, you just affirm whatever that's there. That's how it gets at the objects. But conceptions are exclusions. Like if you put up the hand for the affirmative, the eyes is just affirm color, shape, nothing else. But if you put your hand down and you think of a hand, only one type of hand will appear to your mind and it will exclude every other type of hand. So for instance, I can see that most of us, I'm not sure if it was the case, but perhaps none of us here are Aboriginal or Negroid. So when we go hand, probably none of us thought, oh, a dark hand, right, with a pink palm. Right? We just go, no, there's some other hand. We think, well, that's the hand. So we've wiped out all the other hands and sort of pushed them all into one. And all hands are like that. So this is how that concept excludes. When we see the hand as just as it is, right? Everything is appearing like as it is.
And
But when
we've
we
also, Eddie, we've also probably excluded all old hands, all baby hands.
Yeah, or women's hands, or like all children's hands. That's right. Heaps and heaps of them. Yeah? So big difference. Whereas if you put a child's hand up, it goes that hand. A woman's hand up, it's that hand. It's right. You affirm it's this hand.
And Eddie, it's really funny too, because even on Zoom, you know, you raise your hand. So there's a Zoom setting of what color hand you're going to raise from pink all the way to dark brown. But there's also the yellow one or gold, which I like to think it's like the Buddha's hand, which is like no racial connotations whatsoever.
So
or it could be Homer's hand.
So when we put up the hand, that object, you know, we apprehend it like as it is. So like I said, if it's a child's hand, we apprehend the child's hand. If it's a woman's hand, it's the woman's hand. If it's a, you know, like that, right? But when we put up the concept of the hand, right, the idea of the hand arises. A made-up construct, made up by our mind, a generic hand. Not the real hand, which is, you know, so we have a real object that we can apprehend through the senses, but it's not real, it's a concept. This is where it gets very interesting, which leads to the next one, where basically when you put your hand up or you affirm things through your senses, basically it's accurate, unless you've got something wrong with your sense, or perhaps the surrounding conditions around the object make you see it a bit different. But like I said, with these, they're always mistaken. We're always thinking that what we're thinking about is the real thing. That's a mistake. Finally, with this, you know, it's just pull up the hand. It's just the hand, the color, the shape. Concept goes ugly hand, old hand, woman's hand, man's hand. It brings all this other stuff in. And so the content is integrated with a whole lot of other ideas, thoughts, and so forth. So I hope you can see in some, you know, these different 5 ways, they quite are different. There's even more ways of explaining, of course, well, 5's enough for us. But there's another interesting thing here about the conceptual objects. So you think, like, yeah, like the chair you're sitting on, right? The chair you're sitting on right now, you may have sat on it yesterday. And you may have sat on it a week ago or something, right? So each time you sat on it, although it's called, you know, the chair, they're not the same chair, are they? The chair of a week ago is the chair that existed a week ago. In that time, it's all subtly changed till we're sitting on the chair of yesterday. And then there's the chair of today. Yet conceptually, the past, the present, even the future selves all get pushed together. Right, so that way we might think the chair that we're sitting on today will be the same one we're on tomorrow. The person I loved yesterday will be the person I love today. Yeah? That's the conception, right? That's the idea. But we do know, don't we, that sometimes things can happen and you walk in your room and the chair's not there. You know? In my case, my partner threw it out. I'm going to get him a new chair. So we get a bit of a fright, right? Where's my chair? That was in our mind, it was the same chair. And it's the same sort of things with relationships. We think the person that we love when we got married will be the same as they were like a month ago. It's going to be exactly the same, and tomorrow too. But we've got that idea, but the idea isn't the reality. Yet we often conflate them. I think that they are one and the same, and this once again we make these mistakes, and we get ourselves into trouble. So just a little bit more, the same type of thing. So generally in terms of perception, we're accurate. And like I said, the eye sense powers, the ear sense powers, they don't think about the object. They don't say, oh, that's a really lovely chair you're sitting on, Eddie. It just goes, chair. It's just the color shape, chair. No extras. And we're accurate. Whereas conceptually, it's always mistaken. It's not the real chair. It's an idea of a chair. And we bring into it more cognitions, more ideas. Like, I like the chair, the brown chair. We give it all these names. We come up with ideas and so forth. So this slide, the one previous to it, they sort of go together. And just to show again the differences between perceiving things and thinking of them, conceiving of them.
I like this slide too, Eddie, because like with the scarecrow, I mean, these are obviously pretty cluey crows, and they know that it's just pretend, but there's a whole lot of birds that have a conception that that's a farmer, not a scarecrow at all. I mean, that's why people put the scarecrows up. So it's not just humans, it's kind of across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So we could, that's how we could misperceive them. We can make these mistakes. In this instance here, it's like a wrong consciousness. But if you're, like say you're this farmer here and you're walking around and you knew that, in my field, I have a scarecrow and it's there to, frighten the birds and so forth. Somebody else coming from a long distance might see the scarecrow and think, oh, that's the person. That type of consciousness is what they call like a wrong consciousness. So that wrong consciousness is wrong in two ways. Sorry, it's wrong and mistaken. Whereas actually you can have an accurate and still be mistaken. So when it's accurate, you can say, oh, that's a scarecrow. I know that's a scarecrow, I put it in my garden. Yet at the same time, the scarecrow appears to your senses as if it were inherently existent. So it always appears to the senses like that. It doesn't mean to say you will cling to that idea, but somebody could. So another division of these minds, conceptual minds, is just in terms of being correct and wrong. So correct conceptions are really about the objects that do exist. Right? So it is a fact that you are sitting on a chair. Right? So the conceived object does exist. It's one you're sitting on. However, you can also have wrong conceptions. So for instance, you might have the idea that you might think that, oh, like all chairs must have 4 legs, because I'm sitting on a chair that's got 4 legs. But then you find actually, you can have chairs with just like 1 leg. Actually, you can have chairs with 3 legs and so forth. Right? So that would be like an instance of a wrong conception. Other wrong conceptions, have much more impact upon our lives. Are the ideas that karma does not exist. That there is no such thing as the 3 jewels of a Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Enlightenment does not exist.
And also things like, I mean, it's becoming really clear how racism and sexism perpetuate because this is the functioning, the mechanism of it.
Yeah, that's right.
This
so
generic image that we have.
Yeah, so it's interesting you brought that up. That's what I was thinking about. When we look at perception, we're looking out at the world and we see people of different colors, different shapes. We forget that's arising from back here. It's not out there. Right? But we think that what we're looking at does actually exist in the way we're apprehending it. Independence upon that, we get these ideas. Right? So you've got two things that are both sort of like mistaken.
And so if we have like an idea, say, you know, of guys, all men are like this, we have a generic idea of a man. And so then, but then if we actually, I mean, and this is how people create harmony and bridges between communities, isn't it? You get to know someone and then you go, you've got your generic image of a man, but then you've got the individual who actually might be quite nice. And it starts, whittling away at that conceptuality of all men.
Yeah, sure. That's right. So, yeah, so we can do that independence upon an actual man that you meet, and they disprove your idea. But they show, actually, the way I've thought of men, this man is not like that.
Yeah,
So
and I
all
mean,
men can't be that way.
that's the beginning of change, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And this is the same idea works with the Dharma, because remember, Dharma, the concept is you don't need the actual person there. You don't need the actual object. You can deal with the conceptual objects by dealing with them correctly. And this is why you also see, well, I think it's very interesting about the practice of Dharma, especially in terms of concepts. Because as Miffy's pointed out, the idea of, of being a racist, for instance, your ideas are arising in dependence upon either what you've read or you've heard or you've had a bad experience with a person of different color than yourself. What things really driving this is the ideas about that person. Like they're the concepts.
Yeah, because if someone says, black man, you're not just looking at color and shape. There's a whole lot of baggage that comes along with that that's almost inseparable. That's
right. That's right. So the Dharma is like separating these two. We've gone, okay, so we have a black man. Now what's usually arising in dependence upon me seeing a black person is racism or fear. So now you've got to go, okay, what happens when you do that? What happens when that sort of those ideas arise? You can now write down back suffering. Some form of suffering arises. I feel really uncomfortable. I'm hurt in some way. So all that needs to be changed here is the concepts. And so we don't need an actual black person in front of us and then do all our work. We don't need to have the actual experiences of things to go, okay, I'm going to do this now. I've had this terrible experience. I know what it's like. Now I'm going to do this. We just need to think it. And I thought this was really lovely. When we were talking about before about the perceptions, when you realize that, my gosh, it's my own mind, like coloring in all the people, like coloring in the whole environment. And in response to that, I'm acting in response to that. Well, once you realize that actually that's what's actually going on, like it's not coming from out there back at you. You've actually made it like that. Your brain and mind has made it like that. Then you got to go, okay, so now how am I going to think about that? Because you could look at that and go, okay, so although obvious suffering is not apparent to me, like for instance, we were looking at sentient beings, or it's not obvious to me that this man I'm looking at is a mother of mine from some previous life. That doesn't appear to your eyes. You have to think that. And that's the great thing about conceptions. Right? You can create a new way of dealing with what you're perceiving. A way that brings greater happiness to yourself and how you interact with your community and the world, then the previous suffering, when you just thought, what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking of is true, and I'm scared. And that, to our mind, that's rational. So I think, well, I'm hoping that, you'll take away some of this material and sort of like think about it, and then how you sort of relate to yourself and others and use it. Now, the function of conception, the function of all these thoughts and that, there's a number of them. So one of them is that the conceptual mind allows us to see things that aren't present right now. But we can think of our future. We can think of the past. Well, we can relate our past and present to that future. Concepts allow us to plan, to decide what to do. Intention is a concept. And intentions are like karma. Right, so we can have a great deal of power here if we could take control over the conceptual processes. And we can.
So Eddie, that kind of common assumption that, say, meditation's all about emptying your mind of thoughts and conceptions, that's actually kind of, apart from being impossible, not really the point, is it? The point is to get our conceptions to much more readily mirror reality, or to know that our conceptions aren't the ultimate truth.
Well, both play a part, but you don't want to go into like non-conceptuality just straight off the bat and go, no thinking, no thinking, no thinking, Like I'm saying here, we can use them both in skillful ways. So one is, like I said, so conception is this planning, thinking. The other thing that it does a huge amount, greatly, is that you use it to impute names. So language and thought are tied up with this conceptual process. Now, what's terrific about this is that you can also see, like I said, when you sort of think, actually, the things that I'm thinking of aren't the actual things. And the actual things that I talk about have actually have a great dependence upon my own mind. My perceptual senses, brain and mind. Then you can sort of see how, my gosh, everything is merely imputed. I just put these names on the things I perceive, and then they come back at me as if they're real. And if you cling to that reality, that's the creation of karma right there. You've acted on this. Right? So the first is the misperception of what you're seeing is true. You grab it as if it were true. So then we have ignorance, thinking that it is actually true. But the grabbing, the holding, the clinging, the grasping, that's an action. So we have karma and affliction being created straight off.
So that means that's also then the creation of our suffering and our misery and our problems. Yeah.
That's right. So, like I said, so that's where this idea of the non-conceptuality comes in. But that's like very, we talk about that in Mahamudra practice, special insight, the Dzogchen practices, those sort of things. But you sort of got to do that on a reality basis. You can't just sort of make it up and imagine it all. It's got to come from deep within, some sort of, really deep experience of it. So this is why you also get this thing that things merely exist. They exist in dependence upon name. The second thing about conception is, and why we need it, is because that's what finds the objects we are to meditate on. So you find that nearly all the objects for a long part of the path are actually conceptual objects. As they exist as conceptual objects in your conceptual mind to access them and hold them. And that leads us to the next part. It's the concept, to hold those actual objects and start becoming familiar with them. So the idea of, like, even now we use the term mindfulness a lot. So this is also a function of the conceptual mind. But remember, mindfulness is like remembering. That's conceptual. That's not anything to do with your perception. So we definitely need them. We can definitely make great use of them. So in terms of today's takeaway, try and recollect this, that the concepts that you have, all the ideas, they don't reflect reality accurately. Nevertheless, thinking is crucial for our development as spiritual beings. So, as a sort of a summary of these 2 points, Geshe Tashi Sering in the book Buddhist Psychology on page 101 says, therefore it's important to keep conceptuality in perspective. While we must understand that concepts always contain an element of error and do not reflect reality accurately, thinking is nonetheless crucial for our spiritual development. So we're just about at the end of our class, but Miffy, what's your time, please?
It's 1:35.
Whoa, okay, we've got just over. So we could, before I finish it up, does anybody like to ask anything or offer anything up, or? Anybody waving a hand? Well, that's okay. There's a lot to think about. I'd just like you to sort of think about it. I've got a little bit at the end here. So basically, we've gone through like conception, right? What it is, how it functions, and to understand its purpose. And if you have the book Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi Sering, have a look at the section on conceptuality. It begins on page 95, goes for about 5 or 6 pages. And if you'd like to go up on YouTube, yeah, there's a lovely little section put forward by Venerable Thupten Chodron, the Buddhist nun who resides, I think, in America now. So she's got a lovely clip up there. It's only 10 minutes long. It's called this: Be aware of conceptual and non-conceptual minds. So like I said, it's engaging, it's quite straightforward. It's only 10 minutes. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And like next week when we come up, we're going to have a look at how conceptions, how wrong conceptions actually produce suffering and discontent. Whereas if we can bring correct conceptions into the path, they'll help us bring about a cessation of suffering and deliver us into the happiness we're actually seeking. So we'll dedicate our merits. Oops. Oh, so sorry. What happened here?
So Eddie, you've got a slide for the dedication.
Yes, and I've forgotten it. I didn't put it up there. So I'm sorry about that, but so, you know, let's dedicate thinking that everything we've talked about, listened to and so forth has arisen dependently. As it's arisen dependently, it's empty of any intrinsic existence. By existing dependently, we can make use of our understanding of conception and perception. Know how they can both create suffering for ourselves when we misapprehend them, but can also lead us to greater states of happiness and usefulness. So we want to dedicate this merit that also exists in mere name to the complete fruition of enlightenment for all living beings. And may that bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may wherever it has arisen, may it never decrease, but increase more and more, so that we might achieve enlightenment and bring others to the same state. So thank you, everybody, for being along in our class again. It's been a great pleasure being here. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the class.